All right. Our next speaker is John Zimmerman. He is an interaction designer and researcher, also associate faculty at the Human Computer Interaction Institute at the School of Design at CMU. He has done so many interesting things I had trouble picking, but me simply oversimplifying, he investigates how to blend human and machine intelligence, how to change to the form and behavior of digital things that can make people experience more valuable. So.
Hi. See if I can make this go. Thank you. So today I want to just talk to you a little bit about what I see as AI's advance on UX. I think many of you will not be surprised, but in a lot of ways, user experience is constantly being enhanced by the application of AI. So really mundane things like spam filters, just saving us time to not have to look at a bunch of stuff we don't want to see. Recommenders that are curating our media streams. The ability to engage in a conversational user interface is just giving us a new way to interact with technology. And then things like driverless cars, which are going to automate the things that we don't want to have to do for ourselves. So it seems very much like AI is all around, and it's everything that we're seeing in UX. And so a number of people are claiming that AI is the new UX, that this is sort of the rise of Google over Apple. It's no longer about a shiny white box, but it's about something that's learning about you. And a lot of the ways that UX designers, particularly in places like Medium, are talking about this is that it's really all about personalization. But when you step back and actually look at how ML particularly is adding value to people's lives, personalization is a big part of it, but actually a lot of it is understanding context, and a lot of it is just general utility or capabilities people didn't have before, and it really has very little or nothing to do with personalization. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience designing systems as an interaction designer, designing systems that are trying to use AI to enhance user experience. I want to talk about a case where we're seeing a big failure in the way UX is using it, and then some preliminary actions that my research group is trying to address this. So I've been working on ML systems for about 20 years. And just go over a few examples. I started a really long time ago at Philips, making TV show recommenders. When we showed TV show recommendations to people of shows they watched, they thought our recommender was awesome. Look, we found what you already watch. When we showed them recommendations of shows they'd never heard of, they told us our recommender was broken. Very interesting. So we had made something that was completely not valuable to anybody, but it helped us engage people in a really interesting conversation where people began to talk about TV as like a comfort food, and what they were actually doing was watching TV. They wanted to revisit the same things over and over. They were very much seeking familiar, which is kind of terrible if you're trying to make a recommender. And so what we did with this project was particularly try to be sensitive to how can I know when you are in the mood to try something new, and how can I give you just enough activation energy to try it. Have done a bunch of work sort of trying to automate work practice. This was a system, a virtual information officer, which could read your emails, figure out what task this was, select a form, fill it out, and highlight sort of actions the agents had taken. This was really interesting. We learned people are terrible at recognizing when machines make errors that humans are simply incapable of making. In this case, the system decided that David McClure wanted to change his name. That was not a good design. Most people don't change their names in an email message asking to update things. I did some work with an in-day, looking at busy parents, particularly when they role switch. So one parent's like, oh, I take the kids to ballet, but I can't do it today. You need to do it. And what you find is parents forget their kids. they leave them places. It happens, but mostly parents have this tremendous anxiety that they're going to leave their kids places. And so we developed a system. We were giving BlackBerry curves to 12-year-olds, not a great idea. But we were learning all of the pickup and drop-off routines in a family and sort of the when and where everybody could be. And then we could predict, when is there a child somewhere that probably should be being picked up and no parent appears to be heading in that direction. And it's not like it happens a lot, but it's sort of like a smoke detector for forgetting your kids, and it lowers the anxiety. So it's kind of the system you don't want to ever go off. So in my city, we don't believe in public transit. So there was no investment in an AVL system. And so playing around with crowd as a material, we built a system where transit riders could share GPS traces on their phones, and then we could collect that information and push it out as a real-time arrival system. And I think this work particularly helped me understand that crowdsourcing and machine learning are not two separate things, but they're two things that are constantly going together. Some work with Jason Hong. We built a system that tries to detect the onset or remission of major depression. So it's looking at how people's social practices on their phones, their activity level, and their sleep. Some current work, we're working on a decision support tool to help cardiologists decide if they should put in an artificial heart. These are super confident people. They put something in the place of your heart. They typically don't think they need help making this kind of decision. So for us, and the other thing, in clinical decision support, pretty much 90% of the systems fail when they move from the lab to the clinic because people simply don't use them because they don't understand why they would. And so this has been an interesting space to work. We've learned a lot. We shared a bunch of covariates with clinicians, and they started to make changes to the way they were going to treat people. Very dangerous. Had to have a conversation with them about taking away people's umbrellas doesn't make it stop raining. But that you have to be sensitive, particularly when you're working in a space where people are making literal life and death decisions, that they're interpreting the information correctly. And these cardiologists were particularly feeling exceptional, so that if we could recommend that 50% of a patient in this case would die, they would say, not my patients. So they're very resistant to statistical information. Some current work that's just getting started, we're doing digital personalization based on people's sales patterns, but instead of making recommendations to customers, we're sending this information to salespeople to see if they can personalize their performance. We're actually looking for, like, where's that super creepy? Where should we not do this? And how do we do research that's sort of actually investigating those more dangerous spaces to ground our understanding of the situation? And some new work that just got funded by NSF. We're looking at robot re-embodiment. So if I interact with Siri on my phone, should Siri also drive my driverless car? Or if I interact with Alexa in a hotel room, have I just left all of my personal information at the hotel? What are these boundaries? How does it change my perceptions of trust with these systems? All right, so that's a little background. I've worked sort of on a bunch of different systems with a bunch of different kinds of machine learning, targeting a bunch of different contexts, and really trying to understand, like, how do we fit this in a way that people experience as value? And along the way, sort of made this observation that UX designers really suck at doing this, and I put myself in that category. And I want to talk about sort of some evidence of absence, like the things I don't see, and that's kind of shocking. So 1962, probably many of you were not alive, but Philips came out with the cassette recorder. I used to work for Philips, so I'm kind of promoting the brand. And it was the idea of, like, oh, this is a lot easier to handle than reel-to-reel, and it sort of creates the possibility of a new medium for commercial music. And what you saw from this technical advance was a ton of design innovation that had nothing to do with advancing the technology. It was just giving it new forms that fit into people's lives. So you got boom boxes, you got car stereo players, you got home stereos with twin tape decks that led to were sort of working in support of people's practices of making mixtapes. You had answering machines, Walkmans, all these different forms that were just repurposing this single technical advance. One that may be more familiar to you, text messaging comes out, and now we have multi-billion-dollar companies that are fundamentally just supporting text messaging. They may be moving it to a different platform, but the interaction is fundamentally the same. We don't actually see this with machine learning systems. So let me take you back in time to 1993 when somebody wrote a book on adaptive user interfaces. This is like the same time the web was coming out. This is a really long time ago in technology. We don't actually have adaptive user interfaces. So Microsoft did some work in this space. They made some versions of Microsoft Word where your menu items would move around. People particularly hated that because they couldn't predict where things would be, but it was the idea they were going to move things closer to you that you use a lot. Maybe doesn't make sense for desktop, but it definitely makes sense for mobiles. So today, almost all mobile apps are using a tabbed-based interface. None of them land you on the tab that you most likely want. Why, when this is 25-year-old technology? So if you use the Starbucks app and you consistently use your Starbucks app to pay for your coffee at Starbucks, it will never learn to land you on the pay screen when you go into Starbucks. And to me, it's like, why? What is wrong with UX designers that they never consider this when they're going about their work? How can this happen? And sort of the reason I noticed this is because I recognized it in my own self. In the work that we had done in transit, we sort of never considered that we should have been doing this all along. So there's a blind spot. And then looking like UX programs aren't teaching students about machine learning. UX practice-facing books don't talk about machine learning. None of the sketching tools, Sketch app, Origami, Adobe, user experience, none of them support the idea that an interaction flow should actually collapse over time as a system learns what you're doing. And an interaction designer actually has a sense of what is it people are going to do consistently over and over. We just force them to keep doing the same interactions. Even our entry-level tools. So to me, it's sort of like, if I'm building a WordPress website, why don't I actually have built-in tools that are doing machine learning for me? Why haven't we cooked it down to that level? So what happens right now is UX designers go out and do a bunch of field work, and when they're exploring, they fail to see opportunities where machine learning can add value because they don't think of it. They don't have a tacit understanding of it as a design material. When they begin to ideate, they work in two equally horrible ways. One is they imagine a bunch of stuff that simply can't be built, or they simply don't imagine it at all. Both lead to a terrible result. But assuming you can get through those two gates and still come up with an idea, it's impossible to refine these things. So there's no way to prototype it. I actually have to build a full system. I can't predict the kind of errors it's going to make, so to understand the implications it's going to have for the user experience. And I have no boundary objects to engage a data scientist in a conversation to sort of co-develop what this thing might be. There's just a bunch of barriers, no good methods to deal with inference errors, no methods for how we should blend human and machine intelligence. We have a lack of feed forward and a bunch of things, particularly things like conversational user interfaces. How do we communicate what the system can do? Siloed data, ground truthing is always a problem. A lot of things that are just making it hard. So in my research group, we're trying to address this in a very scattered way, but sort of looking for where can we get some traction to move things forward. Doing very traditional UX work, so we're doing field work with the UX designers that are actually working on machine learning systems, surveys, interviews, some workshops to understand how do they work differently than other UX designers. What is that difference, and then how do we operationalize that in other designers? We've been looking at some trends. I love this chart. This is the increase in machine learning in HCI publications. If you look at the blue line, that is the publications that talk about machine learning and user experience. It's It's a little tiny bump, which basically means that design researchers that are publishing in this space aren't doing anything with machine learning, and that's something we should fix. My student has been doing some topic modeling, trying to identify what are the topics HCI researchers are working on with machine learning, and can we use this as a starting place for doing sensitizing concepts that make this technology much more available to designers. And in this space, I really love the work of Camille Musset. I don't know if you guys know his work. He was an industrial designer trying to work with haptics. But it's this other thing like, well, what is the range of possibilities you have with a haptic device other than something that just buzzes? And he created a sort of goal for himself to make a new haptic device every day. He called it Sketching with Haptics. Made a whole bunch of things, created a whole bunch of new sensations, but also along the way created a language for talking about these things that was very easy for designers to understand and then begin to imagine a set of new possibilities. And I think sensitizing concepts are different than demonstrational concepts, which is like, I can prove this works. Sensitizing concept is really about trying to open up the space of possibility for that design innovation to happen. But we don't quite know what these are, how they work, when are we making ones that are effective. We've been coming up with a set of design patterns. This is particularly around adaptive UI for mobiles. It's just sort of a starting place. But things like landing. So if you have a landing screen, you should consider maybe it goes here. Does this actually help UX designers? Along the way, we're also looking at making new sketching tools for wireframing, where we're thinking about how do you collapse flows, how do you sort of design to support this, but also how do you build in basically a back button when there's an inferencing error so that the cost of the error is very light. And we've been looking at boundary objects, so many of you will know what a confusion matrix is. We're making something, we call it the user experience confusion matrix, where we talk about what is the value of a true positive, what's the sort of negative value of a false negative, the negative value of a false positive, to think through and to begin to engage in a conversation with the data scientists on how to tune an algorithm to get the output that you want. Some final thoughts. We really want to make AI the new UX, but if we're going to do this, we really have to think about how to get data scientists and UX designers to work together to sort of have a much better blending of engineering and user experience together. So just kind of promote, we need to actually fund more research on the UX side for how to do this. We need to put a bunch more ML into UX education. And we have to be more careful in thinking about how do we want to transfer the advances that we're making to practice that's beyond just making toolkits. So toolkits are great for a technical crowd, but they're terrible for a design crowd. What else can we do to aid with that transfer? So, thank you.
We have time for maybe one question.